The whys and the wherefores have to do with how the system was constructed in general, but there are certain courts in which there are typically juries unless the people who are being tried have waived the right to a jury trial. There are other courts that basically never have juries, and the decision is made by the judge or a panel of judges, and they're, essentially the, quote, jurists in that instance, and they take care of that decision. There are certain courts in which there are basically never any kind of jury other than the judges. Examples of this are certain of the appellate courts and the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about that a little bit on lower and higher courts, which is the subject of today's Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Thursday, the 29th of April of 2021. Thank you to everybody who's joining me on Rumble, on YouTube, and on the podcast. Welcome, and I hope that I say something that at least gets you thinking a little bit, right? And hopefully that you'll even find useful and worthwhile. So here's the thing. If you look at courts like the Supreme Court, you will realize that the decisions that are reached by the judges, the people who have been put there to supposedly, in a typical court scenario, moderate what happens, to make sure that things are done as they're supposed to be done, properly, in order, legally, lawfully, and so forth. But in the Supreme Court, and in certain other courts, the people who actually render decisions are those same individuals. And in fact, in the Supreme Court, as a rule, there's little to no need for any kind of action on the part of, obviously they get rule on whether or not somebody's doing something that's objectionable or whatever, if the case actually involves people coming in to give testimony of various kinds. But the point is that those courts, the decision that is finally rendered is rendered typically by the majority of those involved. And this is one of the reasons that it really makes sense to have 9 people on the Supreme Court. When you have a jury, most of the time, it's a jury of 9 people. It's a jury of 9. And that's on purpose, too, because it means that there's as good a chance as not. If you have a beyond a reasonable doubt type of a situation, which the Supreme Court typically doesn't deal with at all, but if you have that in a lower court, then you have to have all of the jurists, all of the jury, if you will, agreeing. If, on the other hand, you have a case that does not require that level of agreement, you can just have a 4-5 split and you're done, right? You've got the majority agreeing. Obviously, in most murder cases, trials, and so forth, you need to actually have, not just a majority, but everybody. You have to have unanimity. They have to unanimously agree. But here's the thing. When it comes to the courts like the Supreme Court, the people who are actually making the decisions, who are actually, quote, adjudicating, believe it or not, that's what they're doing, right? Deciding who's guilty, who's innocent, where a particular group of laws is concerned. In the case of a lower court, it's a jury typically, or sometimes it's not. Sometimes the judge does that work, or a panel of judges, as I say, does that work. But the point is, in the Supreme Court, the people who make the decision whether something is legally correct or illegal or improper, that would be the judges. The judges are doing that, right? That's not something that the jury does. That's something the judges are doing. And so when you start talking about courts like the Supreme Court, and you start saying things like it's okay to add members to that court, my immediate thought is there are significant reasons that it's not a good idea to add to the members of those other courts. Now, when you talk about certain of those courts, they have rules that say things like 9 people decide, or 3 people decide, or 1 judge presides and decides, essentially. But the problem with doing that to the Supreme Court is right now decisions are rendered by the court as a whole. And I think that's an important thing, because the standard should be the majority but it should be a standard of the entire sitting body. So the thing is, if you go from where you have 9 to where you have, say, 12 or 15 justices on the Supreme Court, now the balance has changed. And the first thing that I would say is, even if you did that, you'd want to make sure that it was an uneven number so that there was a possibility or less possibility of ties and decisions. But the truth is, I really think that 9 is pretty much an optimal number, and I think that that's been proven over and over again by various cases. Now, there are those who will argue that a 9-person jury, 9 panelists, right, on a jury, is not really a good number. And I'd love to hear those arguments if you want to bring them up, but I'll just tell you right now that everything I know at the present moment says, no, that's actually a pretty darn fine number of people to have judging cases. And I think that that applies to the Supreme Court as well as many others. I don't know about certain of the other courts where they have a lesser number of people making the decisions, whether it's 1 or 3 or whatever. What I do know is that the one that matters a whole awful lot is that Supreme Court, where we start to get into constitutionality and various other issues over which, whether correct or incorrect, they tend to be the arbiters. Okay? So when you ask me why I don't agree with the idea of expanding and packing the Supreme Court, forget the packing even for a minute. Let's just talk about the expansion concept. Either you do one of a couple of things. Either you make it so that you allow for the random selection of jurists, if you will, to where you only have 9 deciding any given case, or you make it so that the decision is, in my mind, is substantially more complicated. Okay? Again, there's a reason there are nine jurists, 9 jury members, 9 impaneled individuals, and say, for example, a grand jury or whatever, in most instances, and that is that the decision is best made by that number, and that's something that's been seen over and over again in the course of time. This is not some new thing. This is not something that happened yesterday, and as people have pointed out, where the Supreme Court is concerned, people who were given the idea that somebody might actually change the number of justices on the Supreme Court have gone, no, that's really a pretty bad idea right there. You probably don't want to do that. That's what they've said. That's what the conclusion that they've come to, and I believe that they're pretty correct in that decision. As a rule, what the Supreme Court does is pretty far removed from standard criminal cases. That's not what the Supreme Court does. The Supreme Court is more likely to make the decision that a law is constitutional or unconstitutional than it is to decide an actual case. That's not to say that the Supreme Court doesn't hear actual cases, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that largely that's not how that works. But the point that I'm making today is that lower courts have a tendency to have actual impaneled juries. Higher courts, often it's the judge who makes the decision. So it's, to me, there has to be a great deal of care taken in how you manage who is on a given court, because they're going to be the ones making the decisions, right? It's not like how things work in a felony situation where a person has a grand jury impaneled. It's not like that, because those people are going to be selected from the public at large. In a court like the Supreme Court, that is not what's going to happen. Okay, I need to go ahead and wrap up, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I think you get the idea of what I'm saying. I'd love to hear more comments on this and some more thoughts on what I'm saying. This is to me is a really important thing to think about and to talk about, and I'm more than willing to hear what other people have to say on this. So by all means, if you want to leave a comment, go ahead and do that. And again, you can like my videos on YouTube and rumble them on Rumble if you want to do that. This has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I am your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Thursday, the 29th of April, 2021. That means tomorrow will be Friday, the 30th of April of 2021. Welcome and thank you for coming on, from everybody on Rumble, on YouTube, and on the podcast. Thank you for showing up and listening through my video. The subject today has been lower and higher courts. Tomorrow we're going to talk about government and personal responsibility. And we have to start thinking about where government responsibility ends and personal responsibility begins. And I think you may find that I don't consider that to be in the same place that many, particularly who are on the left, seem to think. All right, it's a bit of a rainy day, but it's a nice day today. Hope you're doing well. It is Thursday. It means we're moving ever more rapidly towards that weekend. Hope things are going well for you both in general and, on the day today. And hopefully your week is being a good one as well. Thanks again for coming along, and hopefully we will see you again on tomorrow's Daily Summation. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Thursday, the 29th of April of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.